The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast cathedral made of crystal and metal. Thousands of seats arranged in perfect circles held representatives from across the galaxy. Each alien species had their own section, marked by different colored lights that matched their homeworlds. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert hundreds of different languages into something everyone could understand. Commander Jake Morrison walked slowly down the central aisle, his black uniform crisp and clean despite the long journey to reach this place. Behind him, 4 other humans followed in a tight formation. Captain Lisa Harper kept her eyes forward, but her jaw was set tight with tension. Dr. Kevin Walsh adjusted his glasses nervously, while Admiral Betty Ross moved with the confidence of someone who had seen many battles. Engineer Tony Martinez brought up the rear, his hands clasped behind his back. The human delegation had been coming to these meetings for over 300 years. At first, they had been welcomed with curiosity and even some excitement. Humans were different from the other species. They moved faster, thought differently, and came up with ideas that surprised everyone. But over time, that surprise had turned into something else. Fear. Ambassador Zethkar stood at the center of the hall, his tall blue form towering over the speaking platform. His 4 eyes gleamed in the artificial light, and his voice carried across the chamber without need for amplification. The Velthian had been pushing for this moment for decades, and now he finally had the support he needed. Honored members of the Council, Zethkar began, his voice smooth but cold. We gather today to address a problem that has grown too large to ignore. The human species has become a threat to the peace and stability we have worked so hard to maintain. Jake Morrison felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his face blank. They had expected this day would come, but hearing the words spoken aloud still hit like a physical blow. For 3 centuries we have watched as humans spread across the galaxy like a fire that cannot be contained. They build colonies faster than any species in our history. They develop new technologies at a rate that makes our own scientists dizzy. They ask questions that challenge traditions we have held sacred for thousands of years. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some species nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Aquarians, who had always been friends to humanity, looked upset. Their representative, a tall woman with skin that shimmered like water, shook her head slowly. We have tolerated this disruption because we believed it would settle down over time, Zethkar continued. We thought humans would learn to follow the established order like every other species. But instead, they have only become more unpredictable, more dangerous. Jake felt Lisa tense beside him. He knew she was thinking about her ship, the Exploration. Vessel New Horizon, and all the worlds they had discovered beyond the traditional boundaries of Council space. Those discoveries had been celebrated once, but now they were being used as evidence against humanity. The human military grows stronger each year, Zethkar said, his voice rising. Their artificial intelligence systems advance beyond our ability to monitor or control. Their genetic research pushes boundaries that should never be crossed. They have become a threat not just to our way of life, but to the very fabric of galactic civilization. The accusations hung in the air like poison gas. Jake could feel the weight of thousands of eyes upon him and his team. Some looked at them with fear, others with pity, and a few with anger. But none looked at them with the respect they had once commanded. Therefore, Zethkar announced, the Council has reached a decision. The human species will immediately cease all deep space exploration beyond their current territorial boundaries. All human artificial intelligence systems will be surrendered to Council oversight. Human military forces will be reduced to defensive levels only. And all human colonies will accept permanent Council peacekeeping stations. The words hit the human delegation like hammer blows. Jake felt his hands clench into fists, but he forced them to relax. This was not the time to show weakness or anger. Furthermore, Zethkar continued, all human genetic research and advanced technology development will be subject to Council approval before implementation. Humans will no longer be permitted to develop weapons, spacecraft, or any other technology without explicit permission from this body. The hall fell silent. Even the translation devices seemed to pause, as if the machines themselves were shocked by what they had heard. Jake looked around the chamber and saw that even some of the species who had supported this action looked uncomfortable with how far it had gone. The human delegation will have one standard galactic month to accept these terms, Zethkar concluded. Failure to comply will result in immediate military action to enforce these restrictions. Jake Morrison stood up slowly from his seat. The movement seemed to echo through the silent hall. Every eye was on him as he walked to the speaking platform, his footsteps the only sound in the vast chamber. "Ambassador Zethkar," Jake said, his voice calm and steady. "Members of the Galactic Council, the human delegation has heard your recommendations." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. It was not lost on anyone that he had not called them demands or requirements, but simply recommendations. "We understand that our species has caused some concern among the council members. We understand that our ways of doing things are different from what you are used to, but we also understand something else." Jake looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as he could. "We understand that diversity of thought and approach has always been humanity's gift to the galaxy. Our different perspective has helped problems that had stalled for centuries. Our willingness to take risks has opened new frontiers that have benefited all species." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "But we also understand that not everyone sees it that way. Some people are more comfortable with the familiar, with the predictable, with the safe." The chamber remained silent, but Jake could feel the tension building like electricity before a storm. "The human delegation will take your recommendations under advisement," he said finally. "We will discuss them with our government and our people. We will provide our answer within one standard galactic month, as you have requested." Jake turned and walked back to his seat, his 4 companions following behind him. They gathered their few belongings and prepared to leave the chamber. As they reached the exit, Jake turned back one last time. "We thank the Council for their time and their honesty," he said. "We will remember both." The doors closed behind them with a soft hiss, leaving the great hall in stunned silence. The age of human cooperation with the Galactic Council had just come to an end, though most of the representatives did not yet realize it. In the corridor outside, the 5 humans walked in silence until they reached their ship. Only when they were safely aboard and the doors had sealed did Lisa finally speak. "Well," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "I guess we know where we stand." Jake nodded grimly. "Yes," he said, "we do. And so do they, though they don't know it yet." The human ship lifted off from the council station and disappeared into the stars, carrying with it the last hope for peaceful coexistence between humanity and the galaxy they had once called home. The message reached Earth exactly 12 hours after the council session ended. Jake Morrison stood in the secure communications room deep beneath the capital city, watching as President Carol Davis read the report with growing anger. Her face went through several emotions before settling into the cold determination that had made her the leader of humanity. "So they finally did it," she said, setting down the tablet. "After all these years of threats, they actually went through with it." "Yes, Madam President," Jake replied. "The ultimatum was even worse than we expected. They want to turn us into a puppet species, watched and controlled at every step." Carol stood up and walked to the window that showed the busy streets above. Humans moved through their daily lives, unaware that their entire future was about to change. "How long do we have?" "1 galactic month. But we need to assume they might move faster if they suspect anything." "Then we activate Protocol 7, Carol said without hesitation. "Send the signal to all colony worlds and space stations. Tell them the day we have prepared for has finally arrived." 3,000 light-years away, Dr. Amy Chun received the coded message while working in her laboratory aboard the orbital research station Endeavour. She had been expecting this moment for 20 years, ever since the first secret meetings about humanity's possible future. Her fingers moved quickly across the control panels, activating systems that had been hidden, In plain sight for decades, the quantum fold drive hummed to life in the station's core. The technology was based on theories that the Council had declared too dangerous to pursue, but humans had never been good at following rules that made no sense. The drive could move ships across impossible distances in seconds, making the Council's carefully controlled space lanes completely useless. Amy smiled as she watched the reading stabilize. The other alien species thought they understood physics, but they had never been willing to take the risks needed to push the boundaries. Humans had no such limitations. On the agricultural world of New Kansas, Nancy Williams walked through the fields that her family had tended for 3 generations. The crops were ready for harvest, but they would not be feeding the colonists who had grown them. Instead, everything would be packed and loaded onto the transport ships that were already landing at spaceports across the planet. It breaks my heart to leave this place, her husband Tom said, watching as massive cargo containers were filled with soil samples and seed banks. We built something beautiful here. We will build something even better, Nancy replied, though her own voice was thick with emotion. Somewhere they cannot tell us what we can and cannot do. The evacuation of New Kansas was just one small part of an operation that spanned the entire human territory. On every world, in every space station, in every mining facility, humans were quietly packing up their lives and preparing to leave. The operation had been planned for 50 years, refined and updated as the political situation with the Council grew worse. General Matt Sullivan coordinated the massive logistics operation from his command center on Luna. Holographic displays showed the status of every human settlement, every transport ship, every piece of equipment that needed to be moved. The scale of the operation was staggering, but humans had always been good at doing impossible things. Status report, he called out to his staff. Civilian transports are at 90% capacity, reported Colonel Sarah Blake. Military vessels are loaded and ready. Deep space supply depots are fully stocked. What about the industrial equipment? All essential manufacturing systems have been disassembled and packed. The factory ships are ready to rebuild everything. Once we reach our destination, Matt nodded with satisfaction. The Council thought they could control humanity by cutting off their technology and resources. They had no idea that humans had been preparing for complete self-sufficiency for decades. Captain Lisa Harper stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, studying star charts that showed regions far beyond Council space. The ship had been one of many that had been secretly mapping the galaxy's outer edges for the past 50 years, sending unmanned probes to catalog worlds that no Council species had ever seen. How many systems are ready for immediate colonization? She asked her navigation officer, Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez. Over 2,000 confirmed habitable worlds, Sam replied. And that's just in the first wave of target systems. The long range? Probes are still sending back data from even more distant regions. Lisa felt a thrill of excitement mixed with sadness. The new worlds would be humanity's chance to grow and develop without interference, but leaving behind the galaxy they had called home for centuries would not be easy. The Council thinks they are punishing us, she said. They have no idea they are setting us free. On the frontier world of Haven, Sheriff Don Cooper supervised the final evacuation of his small town. The community had been built by people who wanted to live on the edge of human space, far from the bureaucrats and politicians who tried to control every aspect of life. Now they were going even further. Everything essential is loaded, reported his deputy, Maria Santos. The last transport leaves in 6 hours. Don looked around the empty streets where children had played just days before. The buildings were intact, the power was still on, and they had even left behind supplies and equipment that might be useful to whoever came next. Humans did not believe in destroying what they could not take with them. Leave the welcome signs up, he told Maria. And make sure that message from Commander Morrison is displayed where anyone who arrives will see it. The message was simple but important. It explained that humans had left voluntarily, that they harbored no ill will toward the species that would inherit their worlds, and that they hoped the galaxy would find the peace it claimed to want. In the depths of space, Admiral Betty Ross commanded the final preparations from her flagship, the dreadnought Independence. The human fleet was larger than the Council realized, built up over centuries of careful planning and hidden construction. Every ship was equipped with the new quantum fold drives, and every crew member knew their destination. "All vessels report ready for departure," announced her communications officer, Pete Jackson. "Civilian evacuation is complete. Military units are in position." Betty felt the weight of history on her shoulders. She was about to lead humanity into the unknown, abandoning everything they had built in Council space. But she also felt excitement. For the first time in decades, humans would be free to reach their full potential. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Operation Exodus begins in 24 hours. May history remember this day as the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure." Across human space, the final preparations continued. Families said goodbye to homes they had loved. Workers dismantled the infrastructure of centuries, and soldiers prepared to defend the evacuation fleet if necessary. But there was no sadness in their actions, only determination. The Council had given humanity a choice between submission and exile. They had chosen exile, and they would make sure the galaxy never forgot what it had lost. The day began like any other across human space. The sun rose on New Kansas, bringing light to empty fields where crops swayed in the morning breeze. On the mining world of Titan's Edge, the automated extractors continued their work, pulling precious metals from the deep rock as if nothing had changed. Space stations hummed with the sound of life support systems, but the corridors that had once echoed with human voices were now silent. Admiral Betty Ross stood on the bridge of the Independence, watching the final countdown on her command screens. Every human settlement, every ship, every person in the galaxy was connected by a communication network that had taken decades to build. In just moments, that network would coordinate the largest migration in galactic history. "All sectors report." "Ready, Admiral," announced Communications Officer Pete Jackson. His voice was steady, but she could hear the excitement underneath. "Civilian transports are loaded and waiting. Military escorts are in position." Betty nodded, feeling the weight of 6 billion human lives depending on her decision. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their faces showing the same mix of determination and nervousness that she felt in her own heart. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Operation Exodus is now active. Begin departure sequence." The message flashed across human space at the speed of light, reaching every world simultaneously. On Haven, Sheriff Don Cooper watched from his office window as the last transport ship lifted off from the spaceport. The vessel rose slowly at first, then accelerated rapidly as it cleared the atmosphere. Within minutes, it was just another star in the darkening sky. "Well," he said to his deputy Maria Santos, "that's the last one. Time for us to go too." Their own ship, a small courier vessel, waited on the landing pad behind the sheriff's office. Don took one last look around the town he had protected for 15 years, then locked the door behind him. The key he left on the desk, along with a note explaining how the emergency systems worked. "Captain." Lisa Harper guided the New Horizon through the final checks before departure. Her ship had been exploring the galaxy's edge for decades, mapping routes that no Council species had ever traveled. Now those secret charts would lead humanity to freedom. "Full drive is ready, Captain," reported Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez. "We have a clear path to the rally point." Lisa felt her heart race as she gave the order. "Engage quantum full drive." The universe seemed to twist around them for just a moment, and then they were somewhere else entirely. The familiar stars of Council space were gone, replaced by the wild beauty of the galaxy's outer rim. All around them, other human ships appeared as they made the same impossible journey, back in Council space. The automated systems that humans had left behind began broadcasting a message. It played on every frequency, in every language, reaching every corner of the galaxy. Commander Jake Morrison's voice, calm and dignified, spoke words that would echo through galactic history. "Citizens of the galaxy," the message began, The human species wishes to thank the Galactic Council for their hospitality over the past 3 centuries. We have shared knowledge, friendship, and dreams of a better future together. But we understand that our presence has become a source of concern for many council members. On the council station, Ambassador Zethkar was in an emergency meeting when the message began playing. His 4 eyes widened with shock as he realized what was happening. Around the table, representatives from dozens of species listened in stunned silence. Therefore, Morrison's voice continued, humanity has decided to seek our destiny elsewhere. We leave behind our worlds, our cities, and our infrastructure as gifts to those who will inherit them. We hope these resources will help the galaxy find the peace and stability it desires. Zethkar's hands trembled as he activated his communication system. Deploy all peacekeeping fleets immediately. Move to intercept the human vessels. But even as the order went out, reports were flooding in from across human space. Every world was empty, every space station was abandoned. Every human ship had vanished without a trace. How is this possible? Demanded the Zephyrian representative. An entire species cannot simply disappear? The answer came from the Aquarian, Delegate High Counselor Murthia. Her voice was sad but not surprised. They have been preparing for this day for a very long time. While we debated and threatened, they planned and built. We drove them away, and they made sure we could never bring them back. The council fleets reached the nearest human worlds within hours, but they found only empty cities and abandoned farms. On New Kansas, the Velthian Admiral Klexler walked through the deserted streets of the capital, his boots echoing on the empty pavement. Every building was intact, every system was functioning, but there was no one left to operate them. Sir, reported his aide, we found this in the central government building. The aide handed him a data tablet containing detailed instructions for operating the planetary systems, maintaining the infrastructure, and even harvesting the crops. At the bottom was a simple message for those who follow. May you find happiness. Here, similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds. The humans had not destroyed anything out of spite or anger. Instead, they had left behind everything they could not take, organized, and ready for new inhabitants. It was a gesture of goodwill that made their departure even more painful for those who remained. The quantum-fold drives allowed the human fleet to travel distances that made traditional space lanes meaningless. Within days, they had moved so far from Council space that even the fastest ships could not follow. The technology that the Council had feared was now carrying its creators beyond all reach. President Carol Davis stood in the observation deck of her transport ship, watching as the last familiar stars disappeared behind them. Around her, other government officials tried to hide their emotions, but she could see the tears in their eyes. They were leaving behind everything they had ever known. No regrets, she said firmly. We go forward, not back. The human fleet stretched across space like a river of light, thousands of ships carrying millions of people toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the galaxy they had helped to build continued its slow turn around the cosmic center. But the species that had brought innovation, curiosity, and hope to the galactic community was gone. In the council chambers, emergency sessions continued through the night. Representatives argued about what to do next, how to manage the abandoned worlds, and whether they had made the right choice. But deep in their hearts, many of them already knew the answer. The age of human cooperation with the Galactic Council had ended not with war or conquest, but with a quiet exodus that left behind only empty spaces and unanswered questions. The galaxy had gotten what it claimed to want: peace, stability, and predictability. But as the days passed and the reality of humanity's absence became clear, many species began to wonder if they had gained anything at all. The humans were gone, and with them had gone something precious that could never be replaced. The galaxy was about to learn what it had truly lost. The first thing Captain Lisa Harper noticed about their new home was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a library or the calm of a sleeping city, but the absolute silence of a world that had never known intelligent life. No ancient ruins, no forgotten cities, no traces of previous civilizations. Just raw, Untouched wilderness waiting to be shaped by human hands. She stood on the surface of the world they had named Liberty, watching as transport ships descended from orbit like silver, birds returning to their nest. The twin suns cast strange shadows across the landscape, and the air tasted different from any world in council space. But there was something else in that air, something that made her heart race with excitement. Freedom. The mineral surveys are complete, Captain, reported engineer Tony Martinez as he approached her position. His environmental suit was covered in dust from the mining sites, but his voice carried more enthusiasm than she had heard in years. These worlds are incredibly rich in resources. Elements that are rare in council space are common here. We are not just surviving, we are going to thrive. Lisa nodded, watching as construction crews worked to establish the first permanent settlement. The buildings were different from anything humans had built before, designed without the need to conform to council architectural standards or safety regulations. They were purely functional, built to last, and uniquely human. How many worlds have we successfully colonized so far? She asked. Over 300 in the first year alone, Tony replied. And we have identified over 2,000 more that are ready for settlement. The quantum fold drives have given us an empire larger than anything the Council ever controlled. The transformation of human society happened faster than anyone had expected. Without the bureaucratic oversight of the Council, without the need to get approval for every new idea, human creativity exploded in ways that surprised even the humans themselves. Scientists who had spent decades fighting Council restrictions on their research suddenly found themselves free to explore any idea. No matter how radical. Dr. Amy Chun stood in her new laboratory on the research station they had built in orbit around Liberty. The facility was 10 times larger than anything she had been allowed to construct in Council space, and it was filled with equipment that would have been banned by alien oversight committees. Here she could push the boundaries of physics without anyone telling her it was too dangerous. The quantum fold technology is just the beginning, she explained to her research team. We can build drives that travel even faster, computers that think more clearly, and energy systems that provide unlimited power. The Council's fear of progress held us back for centuries. Now we can finally see what humans are truly capable of. Her team worked with an energy that bordered on fever. They were not just building new technology, they were building the future of their species. Every breakthrough, every discovery, every invention was theirs to keep and improve. No alien committee would vote to restrict their progress or demand. They share their secrets. The political structure of the Human Federation was unlike anything in Council space. President Carol Davis had been elected by direct vote of every human citizen, regardless of which world they lived on. The government was small, efficient, and focused on one simple goal: helping humanity reach its full potential. We are no longer the species that begged for acceptance at the Council's table, she announced to the Assembly of Worlds during their first session. We are something new, something the galaxy has never seen before. We are humans free to be ourselves. The Assembly met in a great hall built into the side of a mountain on Liberty. Representatives from every human world came together to make decisions that would shape their future. But, unlike the Council, where different species fought for advantage over each other, the human representatives worked together toward common goals. The changes went deeper than politics and technology. The shared experience of leaving everything behind had united humanity in ways that surprised even their own leaders. Children who had been born on different worlds spoke of each other as family. Scientists shared their discoveries freely, knowing that every breakthrough helped all of humanity. Soldiers trained together as if they were defending a single, precious home. General Matt Sullivan watched the military exercises from his command post on the fortress world of New Sparta. The human military had been transformed by freedom just as much as their science and politics. Without Council restrictions on weapon development, without limits on tactical thinking, the human armed forces had become something extraordinary. The Council never understood what they were dealing with, he told his staff as they watched the training exercises. They saw our military as a threat to their control, but they never realized that control was what made us weak. Now that we are free to fight as humans fight, we have become something they could never defeat. The soldiers moved across the battlefield with precision and creativity that amazed their commanders. They used tactics that no council species had ever seen, weapons that no alien military had ever faced, and strategies that seemed to break every rule of traditional warfare. But most importantly, they fought with the passion of people defending their freedom. The economic system that developed in human space was equally revolutionary. Without the complex trade regulations and species-based restrictions of the Council, human commerce exploded across their new territories. Ships carried goods and ideas between worlds with no bureaucratic delays, no alien inspectors, and no limits on what could be traded or sold. Farmer Nancy Williams found herself managing agricultural operations across dozens of worlds. The crops that grew in the rich soil of human space were better than anything she had produced under Council oversight. The farming techniques that had been restricted in alien space were now standard practice, and the results were amazing. "We are not just feeding ourselves," she told her agricultural council. "We are creating abundance on a scale that the galaxy has never seen. Our children will grow up in a universe where hunger is just a memory." The cultural renaissance that followed was perhaps the most surprising development of all. Human artists, writers, musicians, and philosophers found themselves free to create without the cultural restrictions that had been imposed by the Council. Art that had been considered too human, too aggressive, or too unpredictable was now celebrated as the expression of a free people. Children, born in human space, grew up with stories of the old worlds, but they were not sad about what had been left behind. They saw themselves as pioneers, as the first generation of truly free humans. They learned history not as a series of restrictions and limitations, but as a story of growth and discovery. "We are not the same species that left Council space," President Davis observed during a visit to a school on New Terra. "We are what humanity becomes when it is allowed to reach its full potential. We are the future our ancestors dreamed of but never dared to imagine." The human fleet continued to expand, carrying settlers to new worlds and explorers to even more distant stars. Each ship was equipped with technology that made Council vessels look like ancient relics. Each crew was trained to standards that would have been impossible under alien oversight. But perhaps the most important change was something that could not be measured or quantified. Humanity had rediscovered hope. For the first time in centuries, they believed that their future was limited only by their own courage and imagination. The galaxy that had rejected them had unknowingly given them the greatest gift possible, the chance to become themselves. The first sign of trouble came from the Outer Rim territories, where human colonies had once served as early warning posts against raiders and pirates. Without human patrols protecting the trade routes, merchant ships began disappearing with increasing frequency. The Galactic Council's response was slow and predictable. Following protocols that had been written centuries ago for a galaxy that no longer existed, Admiral Klexter stood in the command center of the Council Defense Fleet, staring at tactical displays that showed more red warning lights than he had ever seen in his 30-year career. The Zephyrian Empire, which had been contained by careful diplomacy and the threat of human military intervention for decades, was expanding aggressively into the abandoned territories. "How many systems have they taken this month?" he asked his intelligence officer. 17, sir. All former human colonies. They are moving faster than we can respond, and their tactics are unlike anything we have seen before. Klexter nodded grimly. The Zephyrians had always been aggressive, but human military advisors had helped the Council develop strategies to contain them. Without those advisors, without the human fleets that had served as rapid response forces, the Council's military was proving inadequate to the task. In the Council chambers, Ambassador Zethkar found himself defending decisions that were becoming more indefensible with each passing day. The emergency sessions that had once been rare events were now held weekly, sometimes daily, as crisis after crisis demanded attention. The human departure was a necessary action to preserve galactic stability, he insisted to a chamber that was increasingly hostile to his leadership. We could not allow their reckless expansion to continue unchecked. And what stability have we preserved? Demanded the representative from the Catherian collective. Our trade routes are under constant attack. Our colonies are being conquered by enemies we thought were contained. Our people are beginning to question whether the Council can protect them at all. The economic collapse was perhaps even more devastating than the military situation. For 3 centuries, human innovation had driven technological development across the galaxy. Medical advances, agricultural techniques, industrial processes, transportation systems all had benefited from human creativity and willingness to experiment. Without that driving force, progress had slowed to a crawl. Dr. Vexani of the Centaurian Medical Institute found herself struggling with problems that human researchers had been close to solving. The genetic therapies that could have saved millions of lives remained incomplete, abandoned when the human scientists who had developed them disappeared overnight. We had the cure for Rigelian fever within our grasp, she told her research team during their weekly meeting. The human research data is all here, but we cannot understand their methodology. They approach problems in ways that make no sense to us. The same story was repeated across hundreds of research facilities throughout Council space. Human-designed. Computer systems began to fail without their creators to maintain them. Agricultural worlds that had depended on human farming techniques faced crop failures. Space stations that had been built with human engineering expertise began to experience critical system breakdowns, but the most serious threat came from an enemy that the Council had almost forgotten. The Void Hunters, an ancient species from the dark space between galaxies, had been held at bay for centuries by the combined military might of the Council races. But their containment had depended heavily on human tactical innovation and their willingness to take the risks that other species would not consider. The first Void Hunter scout ships appeared at the galaxy's edge exactly 2 years after humanity's departure. They moved with technologies that seemed to bend the laws of physics, and they struck with a savagery that the Council had not seen in living memory. Admiral Klexther watched the tactical reports with growing horror. They are not following any recognizable attack pattern, he told his staff. Every strategy we use against them fails within hours. It is as if they can predict our every move. Perhaps because they can, suggested his tactical advisor, a young Aquarian named Murtok. The humans always said that our military thinking was too rigid, too predictable. Without their creative approaches, we are fighting the same battles our ancestors fought 1,000 years ago. The Aquarian Collective was the first major power to openly criticize the Council's decision to exile humanity. High Counselor Murthia had been a friend to humans for decades, and she watched the galaxy's decline with growing anger and sadness. You cast out the one species that brought innovation and hope to this galaxy, she announced during a public session that was broadcast across Council space. You feared their differences, their questions, their refusal to accept that things had to be done the old way. Now you reap the consequences of your fear? Her words sparked protests across dozens of worlds. Citizens who had once supported the human exile began to question whether they had made a terrible mistake. The younger generation, who had grown up with human entertainment, human ideas, and human friends, organized demonstrations demanding that the Council attempt to contact the departed species. The economic situation continued to worsen as trade. Networks that had been established with human help began to collapse. The Zephyrian expansion cut off vital supply lines, while pirate attacks made commerce increasingly dangerous. Worlds that had once prospered began to experience shortages of basic goods. On the agricultural world of Ceres Prima, Farmer Kelther watched his crops fail for the 3rd consecutive season. The human agricultural advisors had taught his people how to grow food in their planet's difficult soil, but without their continued guidance, the techniques were failing. My grandfather told me stories of the time before humans came, he said to his son as they surveyed the dying fields. He said, "Our people were always hungry, always struggling. I thought those days were gone forever." The medical crisis was equally severe. Hospitals across the galaxy found themselves unable to treat diseases that human doctors had routinely cured. The advanced surgical techniques that human physicians had developed could not be replicated by other species who approached medicine. In fundamentally different ways, the Council's response to each crisis was hampered by bureaucratic procedures that had been designed for a peaceful, stable galaxy. Every decision required committee approval, every action needed consensus from dozens of different species with competing interests. The quick, decisive responses that humans had often provided were simply impossible under the Council system. "We need to recall the humans," Admiral Klexler told the Emergency Military Council during yet another crisis meeting. "Without their tactical flexibility, without their willingness to try new approaches, we cannot maintain our borders against the Void Hunters." "Recall them with what?" asked the Centaurian general. "We do not even know where they went. Their quantum-fold technology could have taken them anywhere in the galaxy or even beyond it." The truth was becoming clear to everyone, though few were willing to say it aloud. The Council had not simply exiled a troublesome species. They had driven away the very people who had made their civilization possible. The galaxy that had demanded peace and stability was discovering that both required the constant innovation and creative thinking that only humans had provided. In the private chambers where Council leaders met away from public view, the conversations grew increasingly desperate. The great experiment in galactic harmony was failing, and the species that could have saved it was gone beyond all reach. The age of human cooperation was over, and the galaxy was learning what that truly meant. 50 years after the Great Departure, the Galactic Council chamber looked very different from the proud assembly hall where humanity had been cast out. Half the seats sat empty, their former occupants either conquered by the Zephyrian Empire or destroyed by the Void Hunters. The crystal walls were cracked from recent attacks, and the lights flickered with the unreliable power systems that no one knew how to properly maintain. Ambassador Zethkar was an old alien now, his blue skin faded and marked with the stress lines of decades spent watching his galaxy fall apart. His 4 eyes, once bright with confidence, now held only the dim light of desperation. Around him, the surviving council members sat in silent defeat, listening to the latest reports of their civilization's collapse. "The Void Hunter fleet has breached the inner defensive lines," reported Admiral Klexler, his voice hollow with exhaustion. 17 more worlds have gone dark in the past week. At this rate, they will reach the core systems within 6 months. The numbers were staggering. Over half the galaxy's inhabited worlds had fallen to various enemies in the 5 decades since humanity's departure. The careful balance of power that had maintained peace for millennia had collapsed completely. The remaining council fleets were outnumbered, outgunned, and, most importantly, completely predictable in their tactics. "We have tried everything," said the Aquarian representative, High Counselor Murthia. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had watched her worst fears come true. "Every strategy, every weapon, every alliance. Nothing works against enemies who can predict our every move." The emergency session had been called to address what everyone knew was the final crisis. The Void Hunters were no longer just raiding the galaxy's edge. They were mounting a full invasion with the clear goal of wiping out all intelligent life. The traditional council tactics that had worked for centuries were useless against an enemy that seemed to understand their thinking better than they understood themselves. "There's only one option left," Zethkar said finally, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "We must attempt to contact the humans." The chamber fell silent. For 50 years, no one had been willing to speak those words aloud. The humans were gone, disappeared beyond the galaxy's edge with technology that made them impossible to track or follow. Most council members had convinced themselves that humanity was probably extinct by now, killed by the harsh conditions beyond civilized space. "Even if we could find them," said the Centaurian delegate, "why would they help us? We drove them away. We treated them like criminals for the crime of being different." Zethkar stood slowly, feeling every one of his advanced years. "Because despite everything we did to them, they are still human. And humans have never been able to ignore people in need, even people who have wronged them." The distress signal that went out 3 days later was unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of the formal diplomatic language usually used for official communications, it was a simple, desperate plea for help. Zethkar himself recorded the message, his voice shaking with emotion he had not shown in decades. To the human species, wherever you may be, the message began. The Galactic Council formally apologizes for the treatment you received 50 years ago. We were wrong. We were afraid of your differences, your innovations, your refusal to accept limitations. We cast you out because we feared change, and in doing so, we doomed ourselves. The signal was broadcast on every frequency, sent toward every corner of the galaxy and beyond. It carried with it the desperate hope that somehow, somewhere, humans might still exist and might still care enough to answer. The response came exactly 3 days later, transmitted from beyond the galactic rim on frequencies that Council scientists had never seen before. The figure that appeared on the communication screens was recognizably human, but transformed in ways that made the Council members gasp with shock. Admiral Helen Carter stood before them with the bearing of someone who had been forged in the crucible of absolute freedom. Her uniform was made from materials that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Behind her, glimpses of a starship interior showed technology that looked more like art than engineering. But it was her eyes that truly shocked the Council. They held the confidence of a species that had discovered its true potential. "We received your transmission," she said, her voice calm and measured despite the chaos that surrounded the Council chamber. "We have watched your struggles from afar. We have seen the consequences of our departure, and we have not been unmoved by the suffering of innocent people." The Council members leaned forward in their seats, hope flickering in their hearts for the first time in decades. "But you must understand," Carter continued, "the humans who left your space 50 years ago no longer exist. We are their children, their legacy, their evolution. We are what humanity becomes when it is free to reach its full potential without limitation or oversight." Behind her, the view shifted to show massive ships that dwarfed anything in Council space. The vessels moved with impossible grace, their hulls seeming to bend space around them. Crew members worked with the fluid efficiency of a species that had transcended the boundaries that once limited them. "The galaxy you remember is gone," Carter said. "The careful balance, the rigid hierarchies, the fear of change, all of it collapsed when you removed the one element that kept it stable. You sought peace through control, but peace can only come through strength and the willingness to defend what matters." The transmission showed more ships appearing at the galaxy's edge, a fleet that seemed to stretch to the horizon. Each vessel carried technology that made the Council's most advanced ships look like primitive relics. But more than the technology, it was the crew that amazed those watching, humans who moved with the confidence of a species that had never known defeat. "We will return," Carter announced, her words carrying the weight of destiny. "Not as the species you cast out, but as the species you made us become. The Void Hunters will be stopped. The Zephyrian Empire will be contained. The galaxy will know peace again." She paused, her gaze seeming to look directly at each Council member in turn. "But it will be a peace built on human terms. We will not ask for your permission to defend the innocent. We will not seek your approval for our methods. We will not limit ourselves to tactics you find comfortable or familiar." The first human ships began appearing throughout Council space even as Carter spoke. They moved with impossible speed, striking Void Hunter fleets with weapons that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics. In battles that should have taken days, human forces achieved complete victory in hours, on worlds that had been under siege for months. Human relief ships appeared like miracles from space. Medical teams with technologies that could heal injuries thought permanent. Engineers who could restore power systems that had been broken for years. Soldiers who fought with tactics that confused and terrified their enemies, but perhaps most shocking of all was the transformation in the humans themselves. They were still recognizably the same species, but they carried themselves with the bearing of natural leaders. They spoke with the authority of people who had built something greater than anything the galaxy had ever seen. "The age of the Galactic Council is over," Carter said as her transmission neared its end. The age of human leadership has begun. You will find us to be just and fair rulers, but you will also find us to be unlike any authority you have known." Before, the screen went dark, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Outside, the first human ships were already engaging Void Hunter forces with devastating effectiveness. The galaxy's salvation had arrived, but it came with a price that the council was only beginning to understand. The humans had returned, but they were no longer the junior partners seeking acceptance. They were the new masters of a galaxy that had cast them out, and they would reshape it according to their own vision of what civilization should be.